In her diary, Saint Faustina wrote words that still echo with unsettling clarity. "I saw the souls who had lost God's grace, but they did not believe they were lost. They lived in illusion." Diary, theme consistent with multiple entries. What struck her most was not rebellion but blindness, the tragedy of souls who did not hate God, yet quietly turned away from Him without understanding what they were doing. Have you ever wondered if a soul can reject God without consciously choosing to do so? Have you ever considered that spiritual rejection may continue even after death, not through hatred, but through attachment, illusion, and refusal to surrender? And have you ever asked yourself what signs heaven sees when a soul does not realize it is moving away from God? In the deep stillness of her convent, where the night air carried a faint chill through stone corridors, Saint Faustina Kowalska was shown a truth that weighed heavily on her heart. Some souls, even after death, resist God not through defiance, but through refusal to let go of themselves. Before we continue, subscribe if you wish to understand the authentic spiritual revelations Jesus entrusted to Saint Faustina, truths meant to awaken consciences, not to frighten them. Faustina understood that rejection of God does not always look dramatic. In fact, the most dangerous rejection is often quiet, subtle, almost peaceful on the surface. Jesus showed her that certain souls cling to their own will, their own judgments, their own attachments so tightly that they cannot open themselves fully to divine love. Even after death, these interior movements do not disappear instantly. The soul carries with it what it has become. What Faustina perceived was not condemnation, but sorrow. These souls did not cry out in hatred. They did not curse God. Instead, they remained turned inward, absorbed in themselves, unable to accept the full light of truth. They rejected God, not by shouting no, but by never fully saying yes. She felt Jesus allow her to sense how this rejection unfolds. The soul resists humility. It resists acknowledgement of its need for mercy. It resists surrender. And because God never forces love, the soul experiences separation, not as punishment, but as consequence. Love waits. Love invites. But love does not coerce. Faustina was shaken by the realization that this state is built slowly during earthly life. The habits of the heart do not vanish at death. A soul accustomed to avoiding truth, minimizing sin, excusing pride, or clinging to control, carries these dispositions beyond the grave. Heaven does not erase freedom. It reveals it. What Jesus showed her was not meant to create fear of judgment, but urgency for conversion. The signs of a soul rejecting God after death are rooted in the same signs that appear quietly during life: indifference to grace, resistance to humility, attachment to self, fear of truth, and above all, refusal to trust in mercy. As Faustina knelt in prayer, she felt the weight of this knowledge settle deeply within her. She understood that God's mercy is infinite, but it must be received, and reception requires surrender. The tragedy she witnessed was not that God rejected these souls. It was that they did not realize they were rejecting Him. As Faustina remained in prayer, the weight of what Jesus had revealed did not lift quickly. It settled deeper, like a truth that refuses to be ignored. She felt Him guide her understanding gently, showing her that the first signs of a soul rejecting God after death are not foreign realities. They are the continuation of interior movements formed on earth. Death does not suddenly remake the soul, it unveils it. Jesus allowed her to perceive how such a soul reacts when faced with divine truth. Instead of peace, there is resistance, not open defiance, but discomfort. The soul feels exposed. Truth feels too bright, too demanding. And rather than stepping forward into that light, the soul instinctively turns inward, protecting its own version of reality. This inward turning is one of the earliest signs of rejection, because love always moves outward towards surrender. Faustina sensed that these souls struggle with humility even after death. They cannot say, "I was wrong." They cannot accept correction. They cling to self-justification as if it were shelter. Jesus showed her that humility is the doorway to God, and when a soul refuses humility, it stands before the door but will not enter. Not because the door is closed, but because pride keeps the hand from reaching out. She understood then that another sign, is the refusal of mercy. These souls do not deny God's mercy with words. They deny it by believing they do not need it, or by believing it cannot apply to them. Some remain attached to their own righteousness. Others are trapped in shame they refuse to release. Both states block mercy equally. Mercy requires trust, and trust requires letting go. Faustina felt an ache in her heart as Jesus revealed how attachment to earthly identity persists after death. The soul continues to define itself by roles, wounds, achievements, resentments, or control. It cannot accept a new identity as a child fully dependent on God. This attachment weighs the soul down, making divine closeness feel unbearable rather than joyful. She realized that such souls experience God's presence not as comfort, but as pressure. Love presses against what refuses to yield. Light reveals what the soul still hides from itself. And because the soul has not learned surrender in life, it experiences divine love as something to retreat from rather than rest within. Faustina trembled, not with fear, but with recognition. She saw clearly that these signs were not sudden conditions imposed after death. They were habits of the heart, patiently formed during life. God does not change the soul's direction at death, He reveals it, and revelation, when met with resistance, becomes suffering. Yet even in this revelation, Faustina felt Jesus' sorrow more than His judgment. He showed her that He never stops inviting, never stops waiting, never stops offering light. The pain is not that God rejects the soul, but that the soul cannot receive what it was created for. Faustina bowed her head, whispering a prayer for all souls still living, still able to choose surrender while time remains. She understood now that eternity does not begin after death. It begins with the direction of the heart. As the day unfolded, Faustina carried the weight of these revelations quietly within her. She moved through her duties with gentleness, yet her heart remained attentive, as if listening for something beneath the surface of ordinary life. Jesus was showing her that the signs of a soul rejecting God after death are not abstract ideas. They are lived realities that begin in small, almost invisible choices, long before the final breath is taken. While walking through the convent garden, she paused near a path lined with flowers beginning to fade at the end of the season. Their petals had lost their brightness, yet they still clung to the stem, unwilling to fall. In that image, Jesus allowed her to understand another sign: the soul's inability to let go. Such a soul resists detachment even after death. It holds tightly to its own desires, memories, and preferences, unable to surrender them into God's hands. What once felt like identity now becomes weight. Faustina sensed that this attachment creates inner conflict. The soul desires God, but not at the cost of losing itself. It wants heaven, but on its own terms. And because heaven is total communion, this divided desire becomes a form of rejection, not intentional but real. Love asks for everything. The soul offers only part. Jesus then revealed another sign that troubled her deeply: the absence of true sorrow. These souls regret consequences, but not the wound caused by sin. They regret suffering, not separation. Their hearts remain centered on themselves, unable to mourn the loss of intimacy with God, because that intimacy was never fully embraced in life. Without this sorrow, repentance remains incomplete. Faustina felt the gravity of this truth settle within her. She understood now that repentance is not simply feeling bad, it is turning outward toward God. A soul that remains turned inward cannot truly repent even when it suffers. This inward posture continues after death, shaping how the soul responds to divine light. Later, in the chapel, Faustina knelt before the tabernacle and felt Jesus draw her attention to another sign: resistance to prayer offered on the soul's behalf. She sensed that some souls remain closed even to intercession, not because prayers lack power, but because the soul resists receiving help. Pride whispers that help is weakness. Control insists on self-sufficiency, and so even mercy knocking from the outside is met with silence. This revelation did not suggest that prayer is useless, far from it. Jesus made her understand that prayer never loses its value, but its fruit depends on the openness of the soul. A soul that has practiced openness in life is quick to receive grace after death. A soul that has practiced resistance continues to resist. Faustina lowered her head, feeling both sorrow and urgency. She realized that every act of surrender during life trains the soul for eternity. Every small yes prepares the heart to receive infinite love, and every refusal, no matter how quiet, shapes the soul's posture beyond death. She whispered a simple prayer filled with longing rather than fear. Jesus, teach hearts to open while time still remains. As evening descended and the convent grew quieter, Faustina felt the revelations pressing more clearly upon her heart, not as fear, but as a sober clarity. Jesus was teaching her that rejection of God after death is rarely a conscious rebellion. It is most often the continuation of habits formed in secrecy, habits of resistance, avoidance, and self-protection that quietly shape the soul's posture toward eternity. While she sat alone in the chapel, the faint glow of the sanctuary lamp illuminating the silence, Jesus allowed her to perceive another sign: the soul's refusal to accept divine truth when it contradicts its self-image. Such a soul cannot bear to see itself as God sees it. Truth feels threatening, not liberating. The soul clings to its own narrative, even when that narrative collapses under divine light. And because God never forces truth upon a soul, this resistance becomes a barrier the soul itself maintains. Faustina felt the sadness of this deeply. She understood that truth is not cruel. Truth heals. But healing requires exposure. A soul trained to avoid truth during life instinctively avoids it after death. It steps back from the light not because the light burns, but because the soul refuses to be seen. Jesus then revealed another sign closely bound to this one: impatience with purification. The soul wants peace without transformation, comfort without cleansing, reward without surrender. It grows restless when confronted with the slow work of mercy. It asks, "Why must I wait?" rather than "What must I release?" This impatience is not anger. It is resistance to love's process. And resistance, when sustained, becomes rejection. Faustina sensed that such souls struggle deeply with obedience. Obedience to God's will feels like loss rather than freedom. They had spent their lives negotiating with grace, offering conditions, setting limits, retaining control. After death, this pattern continues. They do not refuse God outright. They hesitate, they delay, they hold back, and in eternity hesitation carries weight. As she prayed, she felt Jesus reveal another painful sign: the inability to rejoice in God's holiness. Instead of joy, the soul feels comparison. Instead of worship, it feels distance. God's perfection becomes uncomfortable because it highlights what the soul has not surrendered. Rather than lifting the soul upward, holiness feels overwhelming. The soul retreats, not from God's anger, but from His purity. Faustina's heart tightened as she realized how quiet these signs are. None of them look like hatred. None of them resemble blasphemy. They are subtle movements of self-protection, pride, fear, and control. And because they are subtle, they are easily ignored on earth, until they solidify in eternity. She bowed her head, overcome by a deep urgency for living souls. Jesus was not showing her these signs to speculate about the dead, but to awaken the living. He wanted hearts to recognize these patterns now, while time remains, while surrender is still possible, while grace still invites freely. Faustina whispered in the stillness, her voice barely audible, "Jesus, do not let souls wait until eternity to learn how to say yes." The following morning, as pale light filtered through the convent windows and the world slowly awakened, Faustina felt an urgency unlike anything she had known before. The signs Jesus had shown her were not meant to remain abstract reflections. They pressed upon her heart as a call, gentle but insistent, to intercede while there was still time. She understood that the most tragic aspect of these signs was not their severity but their familiarity. They were patterns she had seen countless times during life, now revealed in their eternal consequence. While preparing for prayer, Faustina felt Jesus draw her attention to another sign: the soul's inability to receive correction. Such a soul interprets every truth as accusation. Even mercy feels like judgment. Rather than allowing God to heal and reorder the heart, the soul defends itself endlessly. It justifies, explains, and protects its wounds instead of surrendering them. This defensive posture, practiced repeatedly during life, becomes deeply ingrained. After death, when truth stands unobstructed, the soul still resists being reshaped by it. Faustina sensed that this resistance produces an interior rigidity. The soul becomes fixed, unable to bend. And because love requires flexibility, receptivity, and trust, rigidity becomes a form of rejection. Not intentional, not conscious, but real. God invites. The soul remains closed. Jesus then allowed her to perceive another sign intertwined with the others: spiritual isolation. These souls do not enter communion easily. They do not rejoice in unity. They remain separate, guarded, withdrawn. Even in the presence of other souls, they remain alone within themselves. Faustina understood that communion is the essence of heaven. A soul that has not learned to live in communion on earth struggles profoundly with it beyond death. As she prayed, she felt Jesus reveal the sorrow of such souls. Their suffering is not rooted in hatred of God, but in fear of losing control. They want God near, but not too near. They desire peace, but not transformation. They long for heaven, but not surrender. This inner contradiction becomes a prison the soul maintains by its own resistance. Faustina felt tears rise as she realized how often these signs are mistaken for strength during life: independence, self-sufficiency, emotional control, detachment from others. These qualities may appear admirable on the surface, but when they are rooted in fear rather than trust, they close the soul to love. Eternity does not erase what the heart has practiced. She bowed her head, her prayer filled with sorrow and urgency. She understood now why Jesus revealed these signs to her, not to judge the dead, but to warn the living. While breath remains, surrender remains possible. While time remains, habits can change. While life remains, the heart can learn to open. Faustina whispered softly, as if speaking to every soul still walking the earth. Do not wait until death to learn how to trust. As night fell once again over the convent, Faustina returned to the chapel, carrying within her the full weight of what Jesus had revealed. The signs were now complete, not as a list, but as a living reality she could feel pressing against her heart. She knelt before the tabernacle, the soft glow of the sanctuary lamp illuminating the stillness, and she understood with sober clarity that every sign Jesus had shown her shared one root: resistance to surrender. Jesus allowed her to perceive the final and most decisive sign of a soul rejecting God after death without realizing it: the refusal to trust. Not mistrust born of anger, but mistrust born of fear. The soul does not believe it is safe to abandon itself completely into God's hands. It fears being undone. It fears losing what it has built. And because trust is the doorway through which mercy enters, this fear quietly seals the soul within itself. Faustina felt the sadness of this truth deeply. She understood now that hell is not entered by accident, but resistance can be. A soul may never curse God, never deny him openly, never reject him with words, and yet still remain turned inward, closed, guarded, unwilling to surrender fully. Love stands before it, waiting. But the soul hesitates, and in eternity hesitation has weight. Jesus showed her that these signs are not judgments imposed from outside. They are mirrors. They reveal what the soul has chosen to become. God does not force eternity upon the soul, he confirms it. What was practiced in life becomes permanent in death. A heart trained in surrender opens effortlessly to God. A heart trained in resistance struggles, even when surrounded by mercy. Faustina bowed her head, overwhelmed by the responsibility of this knowledge. She realized that Jesus had not shown her these signs to inspire fear of death, but urgency in life. Every small act of trust matters. Every moment of humility shapes the soul. Every surrender, no matter how quiet, loosens the grip of fear and opens the heart wider to grace. She felt Jesus draw near with tenderness, reminding her that no soul is beyond mercy while it still chooses. The tragedy is not weakness. The tragedy is refusal. And refusal often hides behind reason, habit, pride, and fear. This is why Jesus asked her to write, to warn gently, to awaken consciences, to remind souls that mercy is not automatic, but it is always available to the humble. Faustina whispered a final prayer, her voice trembling with love rather than fear. Jesus, teach souls to trust you before they stand before you. As she rose from prayer, a deep peace settled over her. She knew that divine mercy is infinite, but it must be received, and reception begins not after death but now, in the small choices of trust, in the quiet acts of surrender, in the simple willingness to say, without conditions, Jesus, I trust in you. The chapel fell into silence once more, but within Faustina's heart burned a steady flame, the certainty that eternity is shaped long before the final breath, and that even now, every soul is being gently invited toward the light.